Dr. Jeffries. I wake up, I'm in an African city in the 1400s. What did I see when I walk out of my house?
Well, that's a very...
What is my day going to be like?
Right. And so we'll deal with it in terms of the regions.
I wake up.
You wake up and you're in West Africa.
Okay. I walk outside. What do I see?
You have strong indigenous cultures being developed around the village and expanded into a cluster of villages and then into the leadership of the village, which may be the royal compound. So if you woke up in Nigeria, you would have the Benin kingdom.
Have music.
And you would have music was a
all
part
day long.
of the music was a part of the transmission of knowledge. You would have a linguist who would be the spokesperson, but there would be a griot who would also be playing the music along with the giving of the story of the people. You'd have the drumming
Leading up to that day.
leading up to that day.
Go ahead.
And they could go back several generations. You'd have...
Now, we were the creators of the literary science. So I know when people say griot, the oral history and so forth, yeah, we had griots, but we also wrote. We were the inventors and the creators
of writing.
Of writing, absolutely.
That's right, and paper.
And paper. So a lot of our information was in libraries, like the
Yes.
University of Timbuktu.
Right, and so that would be
University of Janneh.
Yes, that would Jenny. That would, or Gao or Mopti.
Yeah.
That would be African culture in the west and north in the 1400s. Timbuktu was a learning center. It was an economic center. So was Janneh, and these were poles of development. And there were caravans, camel caravans, that linked them to North Africa and linked them to Cairo and then linked them to Mecca. And so there was a cohesion of cultural, economics, politics in North Africa. In West Africa, you had it with the forest kingdoms, like the Akan. The center of the Akan is the Ashanti, or the Yoruba, and the Yoruba might have the Ife and the other groups, or the Igbo. And each of these cultures had economics. They were either fishermen or craftspeople, or they were farmers or hunters. And each of them had a political structure to manage what they had in place. And then they had a cultural structure that gave continuity so that nobody was dislocated culturally.
Now I'm told, hold your thought, I'm told that you were as safe on a caravan coming into one of those cities as you were in the king's court. They didn't tolerate no bandits or no highway robbers or nothing like that. When you were on a caravan, you were safe, bringing your goods to trade and so forth.
Yes, there are chronicles.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
There are chronicles written by African Islamic scholars that stated that the peace and tranquility of not only the towns or the capital, but even traveling between them on the caravans, the peace and tranquility was such that it wasn't comparable anywhere else in the world.
In the world.
And so these are what the folks were saying. They even had a trading system called a silent trade, which Basil Davison describes in one of his books, where you would maybe leave Timbuktu or one of the major cities, and you'd be trading with the other peoples. And the silent trade was, if you wanted to purchase salt, you leave the gold for the salt, and then the people would come and see how much gold, and if it's not enough, they would bring more salt if they wanted more money. And so they actually had it's amazing the traditions that they had. They were the first to produce in the Nile River Valley a coinage that was used. In West Africa, they used cowrie shells. My wife has in the kitchen cowrie shell mats, And in West Africa, those cowrie shells were so stable that they were used as part of the monetary system.
Yeah. But you know, Dr. Jeffries.
So to say Africans were savages,
Oh, my
didn't
goodness.
have cultural traditions,
Oh, my goodness.
even the most
They say
modest.
that we're the dark planet. I mean, the
Yeah,
dark
dark
continent.
continent, yes.
Sun rises in the east
Right.
every
And
morning.
Even in the thick forests, the Twa people, the small people, the so-called pygmies, had their heavy cultural institutions, respect for each other, living together, sharing, hunting together. And so, no matter what level you look at in terms of the African past, you see this deep cultural tradition of family that has passed on ancestors, and a family that are yet to come, that come out of the universe of the Creator.
Now, Europeans, from what I understood, that came to visit our homeland, went back and said, truly the gods must live amongst the Africans.
Well,
Because we're so alive with creativity. Everything was, there was no such thing as a chair. It was a chair that was a work of art. Everything was a work of art. There was nothing mundane. Everything had creativity in it. So, you know, to live in a world where it's a natural thing to see beautiful carvings and statues
and they mean something.
and it means
It's
something.
not just the beauty for beauty's sake. There's meaning to the jewelry. There's meaning to the rings. There's meaning to the chairs. For example, they carved.
And to the names.
That's right. In Ghana and West
Some of these
Africa,
names they got on these kids nowadays, Brother Jeffries.
Taisha.
Oh,
something
come
like
on,
that.
man. I mean, you know, and get mad when you can't pronounce
That's
it.
right. Well, within the Akan tradition, for example, West Africa, and in the Yoruba tradition, you may have several names. One may do with your chronology, with the day that you were born. One might do with how you fit into the family history. If they have a tradition of a great ancestor coming, you may be matched with him or her. So the culture is very deep and profound. And so, but the region of North Africa has a cultural continuity. The region of West Africa, which is largely forest, has a cultural continuity. The region of Central Africa, which is deep forest, that's the Congo and the rainforest there, they have traditions. In East Africa, you have the highlands of the Sudan and Ethiopia going into Uganda. And then in going towards South Africa, you have another cultural region that might include South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, where you have a mix of desert, a mix of forest, etc. So, yes, studying the African continent and its components is very significant. Today, the African Union, which is the Organization of African States, has laid out a formulation that there are 5 regions, and each of those regions has a certain development, economically, politically, and culturally. And what they have asked us to do, the Africans taken out of Africa who are in what they call the diaspora, they are dispersed in Europe and in the Americas and in the islands of the Pacific. They are asking us to create a 6th region that represents those outside of Africa, so that we can begin to coordinate our economics, our politics, and our culture. And that's where the future is. And this particular symbol was produced by one of the African heads of state, the president of Senegal. And he was encouraged to do it by the African leaders of other states, such as Nigeria, Obasanjo, president, and South Africa, President Mbeki, who followed Nelson Mandela as president. And this is a symbol of our future. The rise of the black man, holding on to his rock, the black woman. And
his future.
And the black man is holding the child who's pointing to the future of the family.
That's right.
Interesting thing about this statue, this
how
monument
is
was
the statue?
specifically designed to be taller than the Statue of Liberty.
Wow.
It was specifically designed to be taller than Jesus the Redeemer overlooking Rio. And in the statue you can...
Is it really?
It is. And it's on a volcanic, a quiet volcano, so it really stands up. And you can go inside the statue and there are meeting places. There's a history of us from the beginning of time through the periods of our development in the Nile Valley and in West Africa and in Ethiopia and whatnot, and to the modern day. I was standing inside with a picture with Marcus Garvey's son, Dr. Julius Garvey, and above our heads were pictures of W.E.B. Du Bois, Kwame Nkrumah, and Julius Garvey.
Inside this too.
Inside this monument. And you can take an elevator through the powerful legs of the black man and his broad shoulders and right into his head and into his headpiece, that's a kufi, and you can look out on the world. 30 people can stand in, if you take the elevator up, and you can go right there.
And where
look
is
out.
this statue?
This is in Senegal, in the capital of Senegal, Dakar. So many people go to Dakar. It's a historic place, and you go to Gorée.
That's enough to make you want to go there.
It should. People should go. Because the history is
And
there.
how was this statue, Brother Jeffries?
It was initiated in 2003, and it was completed 7 years later. And so in 2010, the world came together for the celebration of Senegal's 50-year anniversary of independence and also the inauguration of the monument. So my wife and I, with 150 others from Black America and the Caribbean, were there to help inaugurate it. Jesse Jackson was there. The head of the NAACP, Ben Jealous, was there. A number of others were there. The artists were there, and some of our great scholars, so that and business people. So this is now a part of our future, but it speaks to us. It's not a military monument. It's not a religious monument. It's not the worship of an individual. It's the elevation of a people. And with that child pointing to the future, it means so much because that child is pointing north, no, not to Europe, where we usually look for stuff. He's not pointing east to the new boys on the block, not even pointing south to the rest of the continent. That child is pointing across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World African, in Canada, America, Central America, the islands of the Caribbean, North and South America, and into Brazil. There's a couple 100 million of us that are in the belly of the beast and have mastered Western technology and achievement. And if we can combine our achievements with the African continent and its resources, economically, politically, and culturally, we'll have a new day. It will be truly an African Renaissance. And that's what is actually happening with all of these meetings, with all of these marches, with all of these planning sessions, with all of these national agenda and global agendas. I'm preparing something important next week for Washington, D.C. The African Union, which is the Union of African Nations that grew out of the OAU, the Organization of African States, which was formed in 1963. Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia was glad to make Ethiopia and host it, because Ethiopia has deep roots going back through the ancient history into the Nile Valley. And Ethiopia has ancient roots in the beginning of Judaism, and it was one of the first Christian nations, Orthodox Christianity. So Ethiopia is one of the modern nations. It was attacked by the Italians as they attempted to get a piece of Africa, because there was the Berlin Conference in 1884-85. They met for a year and a half to carve up Africa.
Yeah, carve it up.
The Germans wanted a piece because they had been the Johnny-come-latelys. The French had their piece, the British had their piece, the Portuguese had their piece, the Spanish had their piece, and the Germans called everybody to Berlin, and they met and divided up.
That's when Nikita Khrushchev was beaten on the table because he came in late and didn't get his share.
That's right.
So he wanted to disrupt everything.
That's
How can
right.
y'all have all this jumping off and I didn't get me none?
The Russians come in late.
Yeah.
So that we need...
Of our homeland.
Right. And Ethiopia became a beacon of light when they beat the Italian army at the Battle of Adowa and Adwa.
Fighting over our land.
And the Italians came in to invade, but the Ethiopians pulled themselves together, and without the modern weaponry that the Europeans had, the Ethiopians prevailed. Now, here is 50 years later, and here come the Italians again, and they invade Ethiopia in 1936-37.